Welcome to all of you. Again, I'm Zach Neese, part of the program team here at the Techstars Sustainability Program Accelerator in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And today's topic is going to be around goal setting and how to effectively make progress as a business. Typically, we teach a version of this during program. What I'm going to give you is an overview. I encourage questions. So if you have questions about anything that I'm talking about, please put it into the chat, and I'm happy to pick up those questions and kind of dive deeper if there are particular things that are of interest. And specifically what we're going to be talking about today is a system that I find really effective and have now worked with hundreds of companies around to help install a really good cadence and pattern of execution. And we do something slightly different during program. So for the 10 companies that we bring into our program, we use all of these same systems, but we compress the time. Because again, a lot of the companies that came through program last year said, wow, we made at least a year's worth of progress in the 13 weeks that we were in the program. So we compress everything down into shorter time periods. So what I'm going to talk about here today is what I think works well outside of an accelerator program. And then the cool thing is there's just a couple of slight little tweaks that we make to really supercharge this for the companies that are in program. All right, so let's get started. First, I want to highlight something that I see all of the time. I see startups, it's pretty common in companies, and startups think, okay, there's this annual goal that we're trying to achieve. And they put this kind of, X in the distance and say, that's where we need to move the business over the course of the year. And then company gets started, there's a lot of activity, everybody's working really hard. And then I see this happening over and over, where everybody's making a lot of motion. Everybody's busy. Everybody's working really hard. And if you mapped it out onto a map of the progress that the company is making, you see this almost like a corkscrew. They just kind of spiral in and go really fast, but ultimately don't go anywhere. Now, there's a couple of problems with this, which is if you can't see where you're at, the progress that you're making, it can feel like you're moving forward really well. And you don't have this sort of larger view to realize, wow, we're just kind of going in circles here. So today we're going to talk about some key techniques to make sure that your company doesn't end up in this place where you're working really hard, but all that energy is going into just keeping the business in the same place. And for me, there are three key elements to the techniques that I'm going to show you today. One is metrics, so that you have visibility around the progress you're making. 2 is goal setting, and 3 is a cadence that helps hold this all together. So let's get started with a little bit of a metrics overview. The first thing that I want to do is kind of talk at a high level, and then we'll dive into a couple of examples, just the bare minimum here to set ourselves up to get some visibility into the business, and then use those metrics and what we learned around that concept to weave into our goal setting, which when you combine those, it's really, really powerful. When I say metrics, I'm talking about ways to measure the business. There's a couple different forms that people often talk about. So there's KPIs, key performance indicators. And then for people that are using SMART goals or OKRs, there's usually a measurement component to the goal, meaning that by this time, we expect to have this measurable result. In the framework I'm going to use today, which is OKRs, that tends to be the key result part of it. So we've got metrics, generic concept, KPIs. Those tend to be a little bit more longer term, longer range thinking. They tend to be tied a little bit more to business results, but KPIs generally don't swing too hard week to week. But when you look at them over a series of weeks or over a series of time, it helps to tell the story of where the business is heading. So it's critical. KPIs are critical so that you don't get in this pattern of very busy motion, but going nowhere. Because KPIs force you to realize and see, is the business progressing in the way that you expected it to over a longer period of time? Then key results tend to be a shorter time period, tend to be more focused on the here and now. I want to introduce a concept that I think is really important when you think about metrics. And that concept is around the difference between leading and lagging indicators. So all metrics have a time base to them, and an ability to help you kind of see into the future or understand the past. So if we use a driving analogy, you can think of leading metrics kind of like the rangefinder or the overall charge left on your car. It gives you the number of miles that you can expect to drive before you run out of gas or before you run out of electricity. And the one thing about leading metrics is they're generally right, but they're almost always exactly wrong, meaning they'll give you a general sense of the future, but you can't guarantee on it. That's where lagging metrics come in. And lagging metrics tell you about the past. They tend to be very accurate because, assuming you're accounting correctly, the past is the past and you can account it exactly. So think of this like the trip odometer or the overall odometer on your car. It's telling you how far you've been in the past. It gives you no indication necessarily about the future, but it gives you a very complete picture about the past. And if we were to now extend this example into startups, and these are examples from Techstars portfolio companies, a leading indicator could be prospect demos per week that your sales team is giving, which then would lead to the lagging indicator of deals closed per week. One of the important things to keep in mind when thinking about leading versus lagging metrics is it's very much perspective based. So it's easy once you start kind of asking the question, is this a leading indicator? Is it going to help us see into the future? It's pretty easy to fall into the debate about, well, is it leading or is it lagging? And so if you think about the perspective of a marketing team, their lagging indicators about the number of leads that are coming in tend to be the leading indicators for sales, because those leads ultimately flow into the sales pipeline and can give an indicator for the overall sales process. The sales team's lagging indicators will be the accounting teams or the support team's leading indicators. So keep that in mind as you go from kind of the flow of the business. Depending on your perspective, you can think a metric is leading or lagging. And, when I think about that kind of at the highest level, when I think of a company's got to get good at three fundamental things, three fundamental flows through the business. There is the selling flow, which is being able to create awareness about your product and the journey that person makes from awareness all the way to a happy customer. There's another flow on the product development side, which is taking an idea or request from the market and how the journey that takes to a valuable feature that's making customers happy. And then the third flow is around hiring. If you have a need inside the business, how do you, again, make people aware of your company now and turn that awareness into a fulfilled, happy employee? So those three flows across that spectrum, each of those you can look at leading and lagging indicators to really help you give yourself great telemetry into how the business is doing. And those are the three flows you have to get good at. In the early days before you're hiring, you have to get good at making things and selling things. And so I encourage you to focus your KPIs, and then we'll get into the key results related to goal setting around how are the measures of your ability to make things, product metrics, and then your ability to sell things, marketing and sales metrics. Another dimension that I want to talk about around metrics are generic, specific, and behavioral. A generic metric is common to everybody. In this car example, in the driving example, every car has a speedometer. Until we get to full autonomous, you'll know how fast you're going in every car you ever get into, generic to all cars. A specific measure would be a tachometer or oil temperature. Those are specific to internal combustion engines. Doesn't make any sense in an electric vehicle. And then behavioral are indicators about the behavior around your product. So in this case, if you have one of those telemetry systems installed on your car, it can tell you, how fast you're braking, how fast you're accelerating, how many G's during, steers, to know basically how aggressive are you driving. And so that's a behavioral metric. If we think about this in terms of startups, think of available cash. That is generic to every company that's in business. It Doesn't mean it's a bad metric, because if you're about to run out of cash, it's a really important thing to pay attention to. But again, it doesn't tell you anything about the nuances of your business. If you think of monthly recurring revenue, that's a specific measurement toward subscription-based businesses. So if you're selling nothing but a perpetual license, the monthly recurring revenue doesn't really make any sense. So now you can start using measures that are a little bit more nuanced and specific to how your business operates. And then finally, behavioral metrics within a business help give you an understanding of deeper nuances about your customer behavior or about internal behaviors within the company. So when we think about this, if you lay leading and lagging metrics across the x-axis, generic specific behavioral up the y-axis, you can get an interesting map of how to classify metrics that I find is really, really valuable to think about as you're identifying KPIs in your business and as you're identifying metrics to gauge your progress during goal setting. There's a zone in the bottom right there that I like to call accounting metrics. These are things that basically all businesses have. It's, the things that your accountant would ask you a question about. How much cash do you have? They're all common to every business because generally they're bound by the general accounting practices. And it's a good place to start. Those are the easy metrics to pick out and start to use in your business. But the reality is that it doesn't really give you much insight or nuance into your business. It doesn't help you really understand what's going on. It can be really powerful to make sure you don't run out of cash. But beyond that, it really won't help you operate the business. Then the next zone, a little bit up, so we're getting now more leading indicators and more specific about your business. I coin that area as investor metrics. So these are the measures of your business that an investor knowledgeable about the space would have an understanding of. It also begins to give you a more nuanced understanding of how your business operates and how you're progressing. So this can be things like monthly recurring revenue that we talked about before, or months of burn. Now, every business is going to have months of burn, but that's a little bit more of a leading indicator than cash in the bank. So you can see how the progression from lagging to leading is going there. And then like daily active users. So that would be a business that has recurring activity or logins each day. Again, getting a little bit more around the user's behavior of logging in. And then finally, we have a zone of management metrics. These are leading indicators into your business that also give you an indication of the behavior of your customers or behavior inside the business. These are really powerful metrics. Now, don't feel bad if right now you don't have a lot of these. It takes time to progress and understand the nuances of your business so that you can get some really powerful telemetry. But I like using this format to have the conversation of where are your metrics at today, either your KPIs or your goal setting, and then to also introduce a concept for later on where we're going to talk about how goal setting gives you a greater understanding of the metrics and ultimately the progress that you're making in the business. It's also powerful, too, if you think about this framework, is if you get questions from mentors. And for the companies that join our program, they interact with a lot of mentors over the course of the program. And you can gauge the understanding that someone has of your business, either a mentor or an investor, by the questions they ask you, specifically around the metrics. So if they're asking you questions that your accountant would ask you, they probably don't have a great nuanced understanding of the business, and that may not be a great person to take advice from. But if they're asking you questions up in that leading zone, in that more specific zone, those are great people to listen to because you know that they have a perspective, a greater nuanced understanding of the market, or even potentially how your business operates, that then you can learn from and help refine your ability to gauge the overall direction that the business and your product is taking. Okay, let's transition now into goal setting. So when I think of a goal, in this case, I'm going to use the Objective and Key Result, or OKR framework. I like to think about it in two pieces. There's the objective, which paints a picture of the future. It's directional, it's aspirational, it's showing you the place you want to go. And then there's the key result, which communicates your progress along that journey. Now, goals can be really powerful, especially if you mix in the notion of cadence. So as I talked about, when we do goal setting in program, we do a slightly different cadence. We actually do a weekly cadence of goal setting because we want to have 13 opportunities to understand where the business is going, to set very short time frame goals, and really get good at setting an objective, understanding the key results or the progress that can come from that, and then hitting that objective every week. What I'm going to talk about here, which I find works better outside of the intensity of our programs, is monthly goal setting. So when you think of OKRs, think about the goals that you're about to set for the month. What do you want to focus on? And how do you imagine the business is going to move over that month? One of the key questions that often comes up at this point is, well, if I set this goal, then is that all I'm supposed to work on? I've got all these things coming in. And when you're in an early startup, I know that there's a million things that are coming inbound on you, especially as the business is starting to scale. And the way I like to look at that is when you set your objective and you're reminded of the progress you're trying to make through the key result, that gives you a filter onto your to-dos. So as you're about to start a to-do and to work on something, you can ask yourself, is this to-do directly related to the goal that we've set this month? And if it is, great, rank it high. If it's not, it forces you to ask the question, is this important and urgent to work on right now? And the power of goal setting, even though it's hard, is to give you a framework to say no to things. Because if you say yes to everything, generally what you're going to say yes to are the urgent things and the fun things. And those don't necessarily move your business forward. So this gives you a chance, a framework, a light framework, to step back and ask yourself, is this really what I want to be focused on this week? Is this the task that's going to move the business forward in an intentional way for this week? As we think about the objective, what I like to do is paint a mission. Where do you want to go? And there's a couple of things to keep in mind as you're doing that. So you want to create a situation where the objective allows you to create some focus, but there's enough ambiguity there that anybody working on it can see themselves in the work. So you don't want to get too specific, but you don't want to get too vague. I know there's not like a mathematical formula here to know exactly that you're setting the goals appropriately, but that's a framework to pay attention to. You also want to make sure that the objective that you're setting is that you can accomplish it in the time allowed. So it's a little bit of a check-in. Is this too ambitious or is this not ambitious enough? And one of the key concepts in the OKR framework, not all goal setting frameworks have this, but one of the key concepts for OKRs is this sense of a stretch goal. The goal should stretch you a little bit into places that you didn't think were possible. And which also means that it's important that you don't get too down on yourself if you don't hit the ultimate key results that you're striving for in a goal setting session, because the intention there is to stretch. As you start to get go-to-market working, as you're getting response from customers, generally what happens is you begin to think about goals in two different ways. One is a stretch goal, which intentionally is pushing you forward, and then another format is an expected goal. Generally, if you begin to start setting sales quotas or doing other campaigns sometimes, you'll want an expected goal, which is this is the spot that we're trying to get the business to. Generally, what I find is in the early stages, though, almost all the goals should be stretch goals because you don't have yet enough certainty in the market to set an exact goal and know you have to hit it right on the button. And that's fine. So those are the kind of some of the helpful concepts around objectives. And when I send out the email with recording of this video, I'll also send out a worksheet that I really like to use for goal setting. And I'll send you some questions to help you refine your goals so that you can use that to pick up this process and begin to refine every time. One of the things that often comes up too is the notion of key results. So key results are where you're setting your expectation for the progress you're making with that goal. It can be really, really powerful to use key results to understand how your business works. Sometimes when you're in a startup, it can feel like a Rube Goldberg machine where there's this really elaborate contraption that you do all these sorts of things, and then occasionally out the other side, a customer is created. Or occasionally out the other side, the exact right feature for the market is created. Key results help you demystify that. It helps you clear the fog. And the critical way that it does that is that I encourage you to think about key results as a playground, a way to play with understanding what are the things that we can measure that contribute to the ultimate business results that we're trying to get. So again, if you think of this map here around leading and lagging, generic, specific, and behavioral, in this example, let's say that we're, from a business result standpoint, trying to improve our daily active users. So let's say that we're working on a consumer app and we're really trying to get those numbers to improve. Or we're working on a B2B offering and we're noticing that there's some issues with, maybe we're selling okay, but the usage by the users isn't to the point, and now we're really starting to get concerned that might be a churn issue here in a little bit. So we're focused on daily active users. The power of goal setting is your objective could be around improving the engagement of your user base, and then think about your key result as picking a measure that's a leading indicator to daily active users and potentially more of a behavioral indicator. So ask yourself, what are the key things in the product that contribute to people coming back? Take a guess at what those are, set your objective, and then your key results specifically on fine-tuning and focusing in on what are the specific things about user behavior that's going to contribute to logins. Let's set a goal around that, measure a couple of those best guesses to begin with, and then understand if those numbers go up, do the daily active users go up? And it's really important to consider that there's a big difference between correlation and causality as you begin to try to understand how variables link together. So in this case, like months of burn and cash balance, there is a direct linkage there between those two. Now, there are other variables, so they're not one and the same, but there is a direct causal linkage there, which is the less cash you have in the bank, the more you or the fewer months of burn that you're going to have. But there are also spots where that linkage isn't really obvious. So in this case, you may have a measure around matches that gives you an idea of how well your marketplace is clearing, let's say, but that may not be a direct indicator of daily active users. So you can get into situations where you can improve one of those measures and you don't really see a change in the other. Or you alter one, you improve the key result that you're working on, and then the business result that you're trying to move changes. But again, it's important to ask the question, is there a direct linkage between those two? It's one of the traps that entrepreneurs fall into all the time, is thinking about if we put energy into here and one number moves, it is causally related to some other part of our business operating well. The next thing I want to talk about is the power of goal setting to make progress. In an early stage company, one of the key things you're trying to do is outlearn your competition. How fast can you go from a hunch about what's going to work in your business to evidence that that's actually working? Because once you have evidence, you can double down on it and put more energy into it and move the business forward even faster. So one of the key concepts here is learning. And learning happens in the gap between what you expect will happen and what actually happens. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky did some really impressive work, ultimately leading to a Nobel Prize around this, called the hindsight bias. So as human beings, we've got this really important defense mechanism, which is allows us to not go around just completely surprised by everything that's happening in the world around us. And so our brain, when something happens, we're like, yeah, that's about what I expected would happen. And in business, especially earlier stage startups, this can be really problematic because it robs you of your ability to confront what you thought was going to happen with what actually happened. And when you get started with this in an early stage business, especially if you're just starting with your go-to-market, it's going to be really hard to guess what's going to happen. And at the beginning, they're just going to be sort of well-informed guesses. So it can feel weird to hold yourself accountable or to check in on something you're like, oh, that's just a crazy guess that I made. The critical reason to do that, though, is it enables you to learn. So one of the startups that I worked with, they did this marketing campaign. It is common with an early stage startup. The first couple of times they ran the campaign, they got almost no reaction back from the market. And I had them note, how many inbound leads do you think you're going to get from this activity? And they noted it down. They got 0 or 1. And again, it was a little bit painful to confront, okay, wow, we thought we were going to have 18. Why is that? And we would sit down and do a little bit of brainstorming and do that learning process. Then one day they came to me and said, wow, we got 50 leads off this campaign. And I was, great. How many were you expecting to have? And they said, oh, we'd guessed 15. And it was the first time they'd ever confronted the fact that they never checked up the 15 against the 50. I was like, great. Well, what worked? Why was your guess so bad this time? And so even when things go well, it's important to write down and have the discipline to briefly reflect. I'm not talking about writing this down in a 20-page document. Very little is good here. Literally, if you just sketch it onto a sticky note, sketch it onto a whiteboard, or use the goal setting worksheet that I'll send out to you, all of that works well, because the key thing that you want to do is confront what you thought was going to happen with what actually happened. The next step of that is to think about, what advice would you give yourself? Now that you've had the chance to reflect, what advice would you give your future self based on the data that you just accumulated through this experiment, or evidence that you got either internally or from the market? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow that advice, but it's really powerful to distill the learning into action. Because, when you're in a university setting, learning is the prize. It's like, oh, well, this is all about just adding more knowledge into my world view or my experience. In business, though, it's not just about learning. It's about applied learning. So how do you turn that learning into action so that you can grow the business faster? And especially for us in the sustainability space, how can we grow the business and also grow our impact? Because both of those are important to think about together. So once you have that advice, then I find it's important to think about, for the next goal setting, is think about what's going on around you. If there have been any changes in the market, macro shifts, internal changes, greater understanding, mix in that advice that you gave yourself, and then that helps you set the following week's goal, or during the accelerator. In the case of doing this outside the accelerator, thinking about how do we set our goal for the next month. So I find that that's a really powerful combination, so that you can go from the evidence and the learning that you're getting, because you've done this huge thing for yourself, which is you've identified metrics that give you, maybe initial indications, maybe sometimes sophisticated indications about how your business works. Now take that learning and combine it with action. And that's this loop that really allows goal setting, and specifically OKRs, to be powerful for your business. And what I find, like I said, is if you have short-term goals combined with longer-term visibility around KPIs, those two combined are really powerful. All right, I see a question that's come up here from the audience. Are there any sustainability-focused metrics or OKRs that you commonly see or recommend? So when I think about OKRs on the business side in the very early stage, there's some nuance here about how far along the company is. Generally, what I find is that in the early stage, the critical thing to set goals around and to really focus your progress on is your understanding of how to get the attention of a prospect and turn that prospect into a customer. Really, what's at the base of that is understanding the value proposition, and sometimes what I'll call the instigating event in that customer's world that drives them to action. So I would really encourage you initially to focus on how are you measuring your ability to engage and deliver product and deliver functionality to the market. If you're even before that, now when I like to think about businesses, there's sort of 4 macro stages that I find that every company goes through. And there's kind of demarcation points where everything kind of changes. and you have to kind of pass through them to get to the next stage. I'll go through it really quickly here because I'll use that to kind of frame a more nuanced answer here around sustainability and overall business OKRs. So the first stage on kind of your progression from founding to a huge company with a lot of impact is founder market fit. I really encourage founders to make sure that they love the market and the customers you're potentially going to be serving. Because if you're not in love with them, there are going to be some dark days in your business, and it's going to be hard to find the energy to kind of press through. I'm going to assume that you're all past founder market fit. The next place to get to is problem solution fit. You have a crisp problem that you can articulate that resonates with your potential customers, and you've begun to create a solution around it that you're starting to get some evidence that that solution solves the problem for the customer. This doesn't necessarily have to be software or full product. You can do different MVP styles like Concierge or Wizard of Oz. These are techniques where it appears to your customers like it's a real experience, but behind the scenes, you're kind of duct taping things together and very manually doing the value creation and value delivery part of your product offering. If you're in that part, so leading up to being able to crisply articulate the problem, getting resonance and understanding from the customers, and evidence that you can solve their problem. If you're kind of before that demarcation point, what I really encourage you to focus on is OKRs specific to your understanding of the customer and specifically your understanding of instigating events in their world that will cause them to take action. So these are the things like, let's say that you're, selling into farmers, and before you have that kind of crisp understanding of the problem, a lot of your metrics are going to be around feedback from customer interviews. It's going to be taking prototypes into market and then getting direct feedback from the farmers or from the kind of the growing environment about, did that work? Does it make their problem go away? Once you're past problem solution fit, you've got crisp evidence that you've got a problem worth solving and evidence that you can solve it. The next demarcation point is product market fit. This is where you've got proof that you can create a market and activate a market around a whole product, not just some functionality, but now you've got the kind of a sense of a whole product. So here what I find is now you can start to think about sustainability OKRs as well, or sustainability KPIs, because now you've got product and market and you can start to measure the theory of change that you have around your product and either the direct or indirect impact that that's having on your customers or the environment around your customers. So here the OKRs are going to be very focused typically on go-to-market. And the closer you get to product market fit, the more the market starts ripping the product out of your hands. And so now it starts to make sense to also have some internal metrics where you're understanding your ability to deliver products. So earlier I talked about make stuff, sell stuff. Until you get to product market fit, almost all of your metrics should be really focused around how effective are you at selling and getting engagement and traction from the marketplace. When you hit product market fit, it's a really thrilling and amazing experience. I've gone through that several times in my career. And literally, you're just running around trying to put out customer fires as fast as possible. So then starts a bunch of measures around your ability to kind of service customers after the initial product in hand. You're going to pay more attention to your development environment. And then, like I mentioned, the downstream impact of the sustainability or theory of change of your business. Then the fourth is category company fit. You get here when your product becomes a verb. People say, Google that. Google has and has had for a long time company category fit in the search category. Also emerging in other categories too. We're not going to talk at all about category company fit here. You're a long ways from that probably. It takes about 6 to 10 years to get there if you're in a category dominant position. So that can help you kind of think about your OKRs. Really, it's about customer understanding and being able to deliver on the value proposition for customers. Next one, can you recommend any metrics or OKRs for pre-launch startups versus post-launch startups? So hopefully what I just said there covers that and how to think about before and after launch. In my mind, one of the riskiest times for a business, at least for their longevity, is that pre-launch period. Before you can directly interact with your market, that's when you're in a position where almost everything you do is a guess. And so I really, really encourage companies that if you're in that place, ship something into market as fast as possible. Not that you're going to change the world with the first thing that you ship, but really think about, what do I have to put in markets so that I can engage enough people in what we're doing so that I can learn as fast as possible what's actually going on in their world, and what can we build that will help solve the problems, the fundamental problems in their world. Okay, those look like the 2 questions. So we defined some leading, lagging indicators to measure the performance of our most important topics. The biggest difficulty was finding the time for measuring, reporting, adapting KPIs. How can we make this process as efficient as possible? To me, in the early stages, an important thing to keep in mind is good enough. Early on, there's enough noise in any of your measurements. So if you do a real statistical analysis of this, there's going to be a standard deviation. A lot of these initial measurements aren't necessarily normally distributed. They're potentially going to be ultimately power laws, but in the early days, those can look somewhat normally distributed. You're basically just not going to have a lot of data. So what I encourage you to do is the easiest thing that will work. If a team is co-located, literally the thing that sometimes I'll recommend is take a big sheet of paper or cordon off a portion of your whiteboard, and every day or every week, whatever periodicity you have on reporting your metrics. So what I like for, if you're doing monthly goals, check on your key result at least weekly, if not a couple times a week. And for your KPIs, you should check in on those at least weekly, but sometimes they won't move, maybe for every other week or so. Literally just calculate it and put a dot on a whiteboard or a dot on a sheet of paper. That's the easiest thing that will work, because again, the goal is about giving you visibility. I see some companies that before they have product in market, they've hooked up this huge kind of data analytics system with all these measures coming in and spent all this time. And yeah, it's a cool kind of infrastructure for analytics of your company, but it's way overbuilding. So in the early stages, what I encourage you to do is put almost all of your energy into the market, into your understanding of the customer, what motivates them, and how to deliver value to them. If you're not putting energy into those, to me, that's worth asking yourself a question of, okay, why are we doing this? And there are some things that are important to do internally to make sure product development is working well and that the team and the culture are progressing the way you want them to. But put most of your energy outside into market. So I encourage you to start out with the simplest, most embarrassing thing that could work. And then if it's too much of a hassle to do that, and you find that you're relying on those measures to run the business, and you're now scared that basically all the understanding of your business is sitting up on a whiteboard, then start to move it to software. That's a much more powerful way to kind of move into this progressively so you don't overbuild in areas that aren't adding direct customer value. Okay, hopefully that answers those questions. If you have other questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. I want to move on now to the next part, which is I talked about cadence. This is the third kind of important part of this that, in my opinion, holds this all together. So we've got the goals, our ability to set goals, ability to measure our progress so we understand where we're at. Now, cadence is the rhythm that we do these things to hold it all together. So very often what will happen is that it's kind of natural for companies to think, well, I'll set an annual goal. What I like to think about is, what's your next major milestone? Think about that. It may be 4 months away. If you only have 4 months of cash in the bank, you've got a next major milestone, which is got to keep the company alive. If you've just raised a round and you've got, let's say, 18 or so months in the bank, maybe your next major milestone is 18 months. Or let's say you've got a huge conference coming up. That's a big industry event that you have a huge opportunity at. Maybe that's your next major milestone. So think more about what's going on in your business than this kind of arbitrary year, and set that next major milestone. Usually along with that, I like to think about what are a handful of business results that you want to drive to. So again, these are metrics, but now they tend to be super high level. It's okay if they're more lagging indicators like revenue. Often you maybe want to achieve a certain business result, which is we need this level of revenue, or we need these numbers of customers, or we want to have this measurable impact in the world by the time we hit this milestone. So think about the date that happens, and then also think about the high-level business results that you want to achieve by that date. So establish that as your next major milestone. Then, as we've talked about here, think about your monthly goals. And what we're trying to do is to try to prevent that spiral from happening, where everybody's busy. It feels like the business is moving forward, but in reality, it's just staying right in the same spot. So by setting these monthly goals, what you're doing is almost providing these guardrails that allow you to understand, okay, here's the kind of boundaries of where we want to move the business or our intention over the next month. So if things come up that tempt you to move the business 90 degrees in a different direction, you encounter the guardrail, so to speak, of that goal that enables you to ask yourself the question, if we turn all of our direction and energy this way, this is going in a different direction than our monthly intention. Now, there may be times where things happen outside the company or in macro situations that's perfectly reasonable direction to go. The cool thing about goals is it invites the question, is this what we should be doing? Or should we reorient our energy and our team toward the monthly goal that we set? And I like to think about these as rolling monthly goals. So as you finish out 1 month, kind of as you integrate the learnings from that goal, then you set the following month. And as you can see in this diagram, these monthly goals really help us create those kind of near-term guardrails on the direction the company takes. The next major milestone sets the very macro guardrails, so that if all your energy goes in a different direction, or it's tempting to put it in a different direction, you can ask yourself, does this contribute to the business results we're trying to create by the time we hit this next major milestone in our business? And then finally, a weekly review process I find is really powerful. So when you have these monthly goals, it's not that you set the monthly goal and then a couple days before the end of the month, you check in on it like, oh, hey, we accidentally hit our goal, or darn, we missed our goal. The weekly check-in is really powerful. So what I recommend is a weekly gathering where you're in the early days of a startup, it's literally the whole company usually sits down and you go through an agenda. The one that I prefer is start out with good news. What are the good things that are going on in your personal life and in your company life? Again, tune that to the culture that you want to create. So if you want a culture where kind of, what happens outside of the confines of work is also relevant, bring in what's going on in your whole life. If you want to create a culture that's just all about business, then just start out with good news about the business. Because what I find is when these meetings work well, you're grappling with some really tough concepts. And by starting out with good news, it puts you in a good frame of mind. Once you go over the good news, then the next thing that I like to go over is progress towards your monthly goal. So how are your key results trending? Then look at the KPIs. How are the overall KPIs trending? As you review through those, note issues that come up. It's really important to not debate what's going on with your goal or debate what's going on with your KPIs. Review them, surface the details, surface the issues, and then note the issues. Once you get through a full review cycle, then go back to the issues, prioritize them once you now see all of the issues on the table. Prioritize them by the ones that have whose solutions potentially have the biggest impact on your business, and then work through those issues top to bottom. The goal is to have a weekly meeting where when you walk out of that meeting, all the important decisions have been made, everybody's on the same page about the state of the business, and you have intention about your focus for the week. Super powerful way to hold the team together. As you start to scale, what normally will happen is that you'll start to form departments, teams, squads, focus areas, pick whatever word you want. I find founders that maybe had a bad experience in big corporate environments don't like the term department. So pick whatever works for you. But generally what I see is that the first time that those branch out is for go-to-market and product development. So if you're a 8-person startup and you've got 5 departments, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. Think about those 2 groups first: product development, go to market. Basically build stuff, sell stuff. And as you do these weekly check-ins, think about what are the key metrics for each of those groups, report those out. And then now this weekly meeting starts to become a really powerful way to integrate information and decision-making across those 2 groups, the make stuff, sell stuff groups. And then as you grow up to, 100-person company, as you're getting a lot of success, these same methodologies scale really well. I had the pleasure in a previous company that I was with to work with companies that were 10, 20,000 people, including companies that were part of inventing the OKR process. And the really cool thing is that what I'm teaching you here today, with only a handful of tweaks, nothing major, it will scale up into environments of thousands, tens of thousands of people. It's really powerful. So know that if you get good at these techniques, they will scale with you as your business scales, which I think is a really reassuring and powerful part of the OKR process. Okay, I wanted to check in again on questions. So it looks like we've got a new one. So the question is, how do you avoid the trap of spending too much time measuring metrics, specifically pre-launch, when there's so much to be done? Again, what I find is that a key thing here is to narrow down your scope of what you're measuring. So in the context of key results, for a month, maybe pick 2 or 3 key results that you're measuring, not 15. And for KPIs, again, thinking about understanding the progress you're making toward your understanding and your ability to successfully interact with the market and create customers, maybe think about 2 or 3 KPIs. One of the startups that I worked with, portfolio company, when I first started working with them, they had a spreadsheet of 35, I think, or 40 KPIs that they were paying attention to. And the first thing I said was, okay, well, when you get up in the middle of the night and you're worried about the business and you open up this spreadsheet, what are the 3 cells you look at? And the CEO had this cell, this cell, this cell. Great. I want you to build a spreadsheet that just has those 3, and let's see how well the business operates with just those 3. And we trimmed it back way down to 3. Now, that was actually an irresponsible reduction. 3 was way too few. But what we found was that we identified that 2 of those were actually really spot on, and we added 2 or 3 more over time to get down to 5. But that was way, way more effective than 35 or 40. So what I encourage you to do is the up at night test is a powerful way to do that. Also, keep track of the metrics over time to understand, are the metrics that you're measuring, specifically this is powerful for KPIs, are the KPIs that you're measuring, is there a correlation at all between the business results you're trying to create? So if there's this metric that you're paying a lot of attention to, but if it goes up and the business results don't go up, then it's important to understand what's the linkage. Why is there a linkage that's missing? And sometimes what can happen too is a shock happens to the business results go down, but all of your KPIs are still trending up. And these are supposed to be the leading indicators that give you an indication into the future. So pay attention to that. And in those kind of monthly goal review, what I encourage you to do is then ask the question, did our key results correlate to our KPIs going up? And to what degree are our KPIs correlating with our ultimate business results? The challenge here is there's a time lag often between those. And so you're going to get your first indications between the key results and your KPIs, whether or not energy here is moving the key results. And then over time, you'll get fidelity around how do the KPIs lead and correlate into growth in your business results. But what I would encourage you to do is think about the absolute bare minimum here. You can go way overboard and do way too much here. Again, what I encourage you to do is start tracking metrics and almost, ride it to the point where you're just barely spending enough time or you're spending too little time. What I like to do is, especially around improving things internally within the company, improve them as they start to become an impediment to moving the business forward. So if your telemetry into the market is an impediment to moving the business forward, invest more time in upping your ability to measure those. But if it's not a direct impediment, then invest the bare minimum. Early on, very early stage, so before problem solution fit, metrics will not be an impediment. Your biggest impediment is your understanding of the market. So use metrics as your ability to gauge how you're developing your understanding of the market and the go-to-market. Okay. Those are the questions so far. If there are any other questions, happy to take those. I'll talk very briefly again about how we integrate this into our routine within program. So like I mentioned, we shorten these down to a week. So if you're in an environment right now that's pretty dynamic, you may want to take what I suggested as monthly goal setting and move it to 2-week goal setting and get on a kind of a 2-week cadence there. But the reason that we do it so quickly during program is I like to think about goal setting and the cadence around that as how many opportunities do you have to learn over time? And so in program 13 weeks, I want to make sure that we've got 13 weeks or 13 opportunities to learn. If we were using kind of what's very common in large companies, which is quarterly goals, during the course of the program, you'd only have one chance to learn. And if we were to only set monthly goals, obviously you'd only have 3 months to learn. So consider the rate of learning that's inherent in your market. How fast do you need to be learning, and match your goal setting and your internal company cadence up to that. I find that a good place to start is a month. Go a little bit faster if you need to, but I would strongly encourage you to not let your goal setting extend past a month, because especially in the early stages, so if you're before product market fit, kind of in that problem solution fit zone, it's really critical that you've got a cadence that is aligned with the uncertainty that's in your market. So for big companies where everything is fairly certain, very little changes and very little understanding accumulates over a quarter. But in an early stage startup, take every advantage you can to gather and accumulate the learning about your market and integrate it in to the overall cadence and operation of the company.